This is a Systems Game Review.
Would you look at that?
Back. Would you look at that, ladies and gentlemen? We're back.
It only took 3 weeks to a month from the last episode for us to get around, and it took us about 3 weeks or so after the episode released to get around to recording our review of the game system.
Doesn't help that I was just about ready to go on vacation when we were finishing that up.
Yeah, not our worst work, not our best.
This will be the part where I pretend to perfectly remember it like it was yesterday, but probably going to be forgetting a lot of what happened in that game.
Well, it's funny because I've got the audio file saved on my computer, and I named it Misus, but I keep misreading it as Mrs. And every time I look at it on the desktop, I'm like, Mrs., what is that? And then I remember.
Alrighty. What we're doing is we've recently is a bit of a strong word to use here, but in the past, we released some episodes of a game that we called Misus. We were playing Risus using mouse guard as a setting, so thus Misus. It's nice, elegant, tied up in a little bow. But as is good old systems fashion, we want to discuss the system. Now, between Matt, Aaron, and myself, there is a collective experience with Risus. My experience begins and ends with hosting Misus, but Matt and Aaron, their first podcast that they ever released to the world was a Risus podcast, or a game using Risus, I should say.
Yep. Figure out my email and I'll send it to you.
I remember I was the editor on that one, and Aaron was the host.
Good times. And
actually, a lot of like the audio skills that I've picked up and the recording skills and even like facets of the setup that I'm using right now, even though this was 5.5 years ago at this point, it's mostly still the same, and I've got it all because of protectors.
Yep. I still, when we start these episodes of Systems, part of me wants to just be like, welcome back to another episode of Lizards of the Toast.
my favorite one will always be the one where you're starting, you're like, welcome back, and I just like, ah! And it just threw you off so hard.
Sometimes you get in a flow, and the tiniest little thing.
Yeah.
The tiniest little thing will throw you out of it.
But yeah, so we're going to take this time to go over our thoughts on the game of Risus, and I think for once we'll be able to give a really solid opinion because there's some actual experience with the game and not just a one shot.
Yes, indeed.
But yeah, so with Risus, I love how chill Risus is. It is the most laid back RPG system that I've used in a long time.
Yes. Very casual, I would say.
Yeah.
You do not play Risus if you want to do something serious, I feel.
No.
Oh, for sure. It's I mean, when you look at the rulebook, it's clear that it's a joke game, and it just happens to be that you can also use the system for poignant or more serious campaigns as well. But I think it's set up to be a little bit more silly.
When one of the instructions is to draw your stick figure portrait, you know that it's kind of a joke.
Yeah.
That step is mandatory.
Mm-hmm. That's the reason that I chose to do Risus for back in the day, that campaign, Protectors, because I didn't have a lot of confidence as a game master, and I also but I had a lot of ideas, and I also didn't want to have any limitations with what I could include. I didn't want to have a game where to have a particular character who could use both telekinesis and also laser vision. I didn't want any rules to say no, you can't do that. But it's definitely one of the easiest games to just pick up and play that I've ever.
It's also great because it only requires D6s. Mm-hmm. You've got just a giant bag of dice, you're good to go. I genuinely, I have like I've never had to use it yet, but I have an emergency Risus kit in my car, which is a few pieces of paper, some pencils, and just a bag of dice.
That's awesome.
I've got everything else I need on my phone, so as long as that's got battery, I've just got the one worksheet.
I love that.
Yeah. Another highlight, I think the biggest highlight for me with Risus, for non-crunchy games, I'm going to put this out there. I think Risus has the best character creation system of any non-crunchy RPG.
Okay, and by crunchy you just mean like really like a nitty-gritty in the details.
Yeah, I mean of any RPG that doesn't have a long rule book.
Okay.
It's just because you can be anything. There's no limitation on it at all. And it says cliche, but you don't need to be limited to the list of things that are on TV tropes.
Despite the fact that my favorite thing to do with that game is just roll tropes and build a character off of it.
Oh, which is awesome.
That sounds amazing.
But the other thing about Risus's system is like you start out, in the beginning, it tells you to think of a few different tropes. And so you put a few things down and then you have that. And that's the only information there is. It's not like, it's not like with D&D, it's like you have all the important stuff. And then in the corner, there's like, your bonds and whatever, that part's there to ignore it. No, like in Risus, you have your tropes right in front of you, and so I think it's really good as a way to let those things guide your character throughout the game. Like I'm never gonna forget that my character is an alcoholic, but also a chivalrous swashbuckler, but also a foodie. You can't help but let those things influence your characters in directions that you wouldn't normally go.
Yeah, I do love the cliches are the most. They're an incredibly simple building block for a character, yet they can be incredibly nuanced depending on the player and how much effort they put into matching or combining cliches to form their character, or how broad or specific they make those cliches that define their character and how they use it. Because I know, Aaron, example with this game of Misus we just played, you were able to find ways to convince me that swashbuckling should be used for basically everything.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a bit of a fault on my part for being a new game master of Risus. Saying no is difficult in any RPG, and in a game where players are incentivized to just do everything, and it can be very easy to just let things go through. But I think you also found a very large number of legitimate uses for swashbuckler.
Yeah. Some cliches can be kind of broad, and that could be viewed as a limitation. Like there's not all cliches are created equal, and if somebody isn't very strategic with their choice of cliches during character creation, it can really put them back compared to other characters.
Yeah, you have to be careful with that. That's one of the few problems I do have with Risus.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Other highlights of Risus. I mean, I love the fact that the rules are so short. That's always a plus. 1 page.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I know this is going to come up in confusing things, because at the time, Trent, I remember you saying that you didn't want to deal with like pump cliches or double pump. I really like the concept of pump cliches. Should I?
Yeah.
Should I give a quick rundown of that one, or should we wait until we get to that later?
I never understood what that was really.
Yeah, let's define what a pump and a double pump cliche is, because we never got into it in Misus, and so it's something that's new to listeners. And frankly, I'm with Matt. My understanding of it is limited, even just reading the rule book.
Okay. Here's how they work. So your cliche, you have a number with it, which is the number of dice you roll. But that number is also kind of your hit points. When those run out, you're knocked unconscious or killed. And when you pump your cliche, it's when you sacrifice a die to roll. I believe you roll 1 extra die for that single roll. But the rule on how you're allowed to use it is you have to be able to justify in the game how you can do this thing so hard that it hurts. So, I don't know, if it's like, oh, you you know, your cliche is high school jock, and you're trying to lift this car off of somebody who's pinned under it, and you're like, I really need to get this roll. You can say, I'm going to lift so hard and strain my body further than I've ever strained it before. Can I pump the cliche? And if the game master agrees, you can. So for that, you get to roll one extra die for that roll, and then you immediately after the roll lose one die like you would if you lost a roll during a fight.
Okay, that makes sense.
So that's pump cliches. That's how they work in general. Double pump cliche is during character creation, you can get a cliche where you feel like that is something that is generally frequently part of how it works, and that would be like a big part of that character feature. It can qualify as a double pump cliche. So for example, if it's like somebody has like a psychic power and they can just like use it, you know, and they have these minor psychic powers, but every once in a while they can just be like, yeah, you know, and like release a huge blast of power. What you do is when you initially do character creation, every die that you put into a double pump cliche has double the cost as normal. So if you want to have psychic as one of your cliches, and you're going to have it as a double pump cliche, then if you're going to be psychic 2, then it's costing 4 of your starting dice for character creation.
Okay.
But then every time that you pump it during gameplay, then you'll get to roll 2 extra dice for that die roll and still only take the 1 damage. So,
okay.
Yeah, higher cost during character creation, but especially powerful during the actual play of the game.
Okay,
yeah.
Surprisingly flexible for such a short rule book.
Yeah, I'm glad we did not do pumping or double pumping in our game of Misus, because it was hard enough for us to keep track of regular damages during combat.
Yeah, it's an optional rule for a reason. I see why it gets left out often. But I love the idea of in the game being like, no. Here's why I feel like I should be able to florist so hard that it hurts. You know, that's what I like about it.
Yeah, I can get that. I say, Matt, what's some of your favorite stuff with Risus?
I mean, I just kind of like that it's goofy. That's one of the main things I do like. I like my goofy one-sheeters. Being able to make your own character what you want with such a limited rule set in a way that just makes sense means that I think that Risus really is the most like flexible one sheet system that there is. I think that it can be used for basically anything. It works better with slightly silly stuff, of course, but it really can be used with basically anything. I just think it's ridiculously flexible.
Its tagline is the anything RPG, so
and it's true.
Yeah, it's like GURPS's little brother.
It kind of is.
It's
Maybe
GURPS's,
that's why I like it.
It's GURPS's baby brother. Let's be honest. Like if GURPS was like, if GURPS is a teenager, this kid is like, Risus is like 6 months old comparatively.
No, GURPS is a wizened old man.
And Risus is definitely
back in my day.
And Risus is definitely in its terrible twos.
Oh yeah,
and is named Kyle.
There we go. Yep.
Yeah. Wait, any other highlights? Does anybody else have highlights to talk about?
I wish there was more to talk about with it, but again, it's just so simple that it's kind of hard to talk about.
I mean, that's the thing is, if you like Risus, it fits on one page, and there's really like the rule book covers rule book. The rule sheet covers only
World's shortest book.
Yeah, only 3 topics: character creation, challenges, and combat. Those are the only 3 things that the rule sheet covers, basically.
Yeah. Oh, I actually have... here's another highlight for me. I really like the fact that combat can be any kind of...
Ooh, yes.
Any kind of, like, head-to-head challenge. So, like, a debate is a combat, a drinking contest is a combat, like
competitive
an election
piano
is a combat. Yeah, I like that feature. And I also, one of the things I really like, and this lends itself to the flexibility of the game, I think some people would hate this, but I like that the GM is in charge of just arbitrarily setting so much. Because, like, okay, compare it to D&D. The GM still has to arbitrarily set the difficulty class for each challenge. It's just, there's one more layer of complication with Risus, because it's like, okay, I have to set the difficulty class specifically for that cliche. But it's not that hard to, like, wrap your head around that, you know? It's a paradigm shift, but it's not too complicated.
I agree.
I was going to say that was actually one of my things that I found confusing and that I struggled with for a bit, was the separation of or the difference between most games where the difficulty is associated with how hard a task is, and Risus where difficulty is associated with how hard a task is for a specific person, and different people will have different ratings for the same task, which I mean is true to real life, but it's just not something you see in other games.
Well, and the confusing thing is, there's part of it where you want to say, okay, this means how hard is it for you? But you're not supposed to take into account how well you think they're going to do at it. It's not like, oh, okay, you have 3 dice in this, so I'm going to set the difficulty for this at 10 or whatever. It's like, okay, for this cliche, regardless of how many dice you have in it, I think it should be set at 15.
Yeah, and that was something that I struggled with doing the game for the first time, because shifting from the normal paradigm to this one of setting the difficulty based off of the cliche that's using it, following the guides given by the Risus rule sheet, I feel like it leans really soft. Like it at least, I don't know if you guys were just rolling real lucky or what. Like I could not set a difficulty high enough to make something like actually a challenge until Matt pointed me at told me that I should look up the bell curve for a certain number of dice, and then I used that to base the difficulty on how likely I think you should succeed.
Yeah, multiple D6s, especially when you start getting into the 4 range, I think. Because with Risus, what is it? What's difficulty? 10, I believe, is one of them.
So it's like 5, 10, 15, 20, and that's basically where the rule sheet stops giving you advice. I think it goes to 25, where it's
10?
like
It's
10 is like basically like a professional should be able to accomplish this 90% of the time.
Yeah, and that's roughly what you get when you start. It depends what a professional is. If you've got 3d6, as we all know, the 3D Bell 6 curve, you're rolling a 10 or lower, or a 10 or what is it? 10 or lower is 50%, and 11 or higher is 50%. So if you've got a difficulty set at 10, you're sitting at roughly like 62.5%, I believe it is. So you need to have a good idea of how difficult something is. You need to know your D6 probability curves and be able to modify them. Honestly, what I would do, just because I'm so used to doing this with GURPS, where you do, it doesn't explicitly say that the GM can arbitrarily set difficulties, but at the same time, the rules make it clear, like, there's so many situational things that can impact how hard or difficult a roll is that you kind of can just sometimes arbitrarily modify difficulty. So I'd say the only thing that I would kind of change with Risus is maybe sometimes adding or subtracting 1 difficulty from a certain roll. I think specifically staggering it in 5 can make for some pretty swingy rolls, because the difference between rolling a 10 and rolling a 15 is absurd.
Yeah. I don't know if in the rules it says you have to do one of those exact values, but if it does, that should be ignored.
I'm pretty sure it doesn't.
Having them in between is totally fine.
It does, like, I've got it on my phone. I'll pull it up very quickly. Okay. Yeah, it shows the game system whenever anyone wants to do something and no one's opposing it, blah, blah. The player rolls the dice. Target numbers follow the scale. 5 is a cinch. 10 is a challenge for a professional. 15's heroic challenge. 20 is challenge for a master, and then 30 says you've got to be kidding.
Okay, so it's a bit ambiguous.
Yeah,
but yeah, I think setting whatever difficulty you feel like is the way to go in Risus.
Yeah, maybe not whatever you feel like, but at the same time, so much of Risus does lend itself to, like, as you said, the GM just kind of does what they want.
Yeah, and in the optional rules, it also gives it gives some difficulty levels that are higher than the 20. So for characters that start to get sort of, superpowers and then like godlike levels of abilities and stuff.
Okay, yeah. And I think it's one of those things with Risus. Like, again, I love this game. It's so much fun. But if you don't have your head wrapped completely around this idea of like how to properly rank difficulties, the game gets really interesting where it's either incredibly easy or utterly impossible for the players to do anything, and then combat is just straight out of left field with how it works. But I really like Risus's combat system. I enjoy the idea that it's like, I mean, like Aaron said earlier, it's like it's just anything where two parties are trying to win against the other in whatever case. And I like the fact that Risus. Okay, this is my small side tangent. If you are a person who has absolutely zero ability to set any boundaries, do not play Risus. You will fail. Because Risus as a game, Risus as a game revolves around boundaries. And it doesn't sound like that when you read the rules. But when you get in there and you play it, you're like, oh, wait, no. The GM, let me rephrase. The GM is the only person that needs to know how to set boundaries. Because if you as the GM don't set boundaries, the players walk all over you because you have to be able to call them on their BS. Because one of the important parts of combat is the inappropriate cliche. When you start combat, you need to set what kind of combat it is, and inappropriate cliches cannot participate in the combat. I'll go to this super easy one. If you're having a sword fight, tap dancer doesn't work.
Or does it? Allow me to explain in great detail to you, the GM, as to why tap dancing should work.
Don't you understand that tap involves discipline? It involves body control. It involves rhythm. These are all the basic, essentials of sword fighting. Clearly, tap should actually be more effective than this.
No, I'm the GM. I'm putting my foot down.
But see, that right there is what the GM has to be ready to do in a game of Risus. It was not something I was ready to do.
Yeah. And then doesn't it say in the rules, like, yeah, there are inappropriate cliches, but, players still just try to convince the GM to let you use it, because how funny would that be? Doesn't it say something like that?
Oh, yeah, 100%. Inappropriate cliches aren't forbidden from the fight. They can still be used to make attacks, provided the player role plays or describes in a really, really, really entertaining manner how it works.
So again, it's up to the GM, like what counts, what doesn't count. Does rule of cool supersede not setting a precedent?
I think the rules say that almost explicitly, which is awesome. But also, oh my gosh.
I will say, for me, the combat of Risus is, I think, the weakest part of the system, and I think if there was a simple way that the combat in Risus could be completely fixed, I would just be, I would be like, this is the golden standard that every system should live up to. Because I really like the character creation and the method for setting difficulties for tasks, but I have a lot of major issues with the combat.
Yeah. I would agree with that. What's your take on combat, Matt?
I kind of agree. I think combat is definitely kind of weak, but I think combat in most systems is bad. So,
Yeah, it's the thing I struggle with Risus's combat is
it's like impossible to balance combat anywhere. And, Risus takes it in that other, some systems make it too complicated. GURPS, although you can hand wave whatever you want. But some systems make it very complicated. I guess it's supposed to be complicated in GURPS. Anyway, enough of that tangent. Risus takes it in the opposite direction. It's very simple.
Yeah. The thing that so to the listeners, when we played Misus, we used only one kind of combat, really. We did a single roll contest with the owl, and frankly, I regret not pushing that farther, because I think it shouldn't have been a single roll contest. Looking back on it, it should have been a couple of rolls. But I still think it was fun. When we fought the weasel, we did fairly standard combat, and the problem I have with Risus's standard combat is that it's a slow death spiral.
Yes.
It incentivizes the player and the GM to basically swap back and forth between as many applicable cliches to stay in the fight, but it just drags the fight out for a really long time. There's not an explicit way to like deal really heavy damage unless you're really creative and can convince the GM to ignore precedent. It's just if you win the fight, the contest, the opponent loses 1 die and thus is more likely to lose the fight. Like basically, combat is basically won in the first die roll. If you just all things considered, and ignoring random chance, once one player loses a die and is below the other person, they're at the disadvantage. And it's kind of like, I don't know. For me, it's like that last part of playing Risk or Monopoly where you know someone's going to win. It's just the slow torture of having to bleed out on the battlefield while they win, which you have to be really creative to get around that, right? You have to swap back and forth between applicable like cliches, which is why like with the Weasel, right? Like when I was building the Weasel for you guys to fight, I gave him like 3 or 4 different cliches that could be useful in combat because I knew he'd be bouncing around between the 3 of you. Because, and here's my other problem with combat, the like team system is so fundamentally broken, no one intends to use it. At least that's my opinion on the Risus team system.
Remind me how the character teams.
Yeah, you've lost me on team system.
Yeah, so
or I have the rules. Should I just read it, or do you have it fresh in your mind?
I mean, I think we all have the rules pulled up at this point.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. When PCs form the team leader is the character with highest ranking applicable cliche. Everyone rolls dice, but only the team leader's dice completely count. Other members contribute only their 6s when they roll any. Interesting.
Yeah, so in regular combat, if you choose to do it that way, every player will get to do their own thing, and the enemy gets to do their own thing. In team combat, each team is basically limited to only doing one thing, with the supporting cast kind of helping the team leader if they're lucky.
Yeah.
It doesn't make a lot of sense to do. So why would you do it?
Yeah. I think the way it was intended when it was written is that whenever there are multiple people involved on one side of a combat, forming a team is not optional. It's also it's a less fun thing in combat where it's just like, yes, we all do the fighting now. I think that in a combat, every character should be saying like, oh, this is what I try to do, and should get to roll for themselves rather than just like our team attacks. I don't know.
And you know, like I've been spoiled. I've been spoiled in my examples of fantastic combat runners. You know, Brennan Lee Mulligan, Brian Murphy from Dimension 20 and Not Another D&D podcast are basically the gold standard when it comes to interesting combat in role-playing games that I've experienced so far.
For sure.
And that is a place where the system shines, though, that they're using, because when you have something where there's a definite difference to, you know, how difficult different types of tasks are, it does feel a little bit more triumphant when it's like, oh, I know that my character can do this one specific thing that's going to be essential. You know, my character is the only one that can commune with nature and bring the lava monster out of the pit, you know? Mm-hmm.
Whereas that's one of the things I don't like about Risus's team combat is like, anybody who can swing a sword, you get to contribute. Anybody who can't sits out.
Yep. This sounds honestly like a really great time because in the game, Aaron, you offered up you said that you had some alternative or homebrewed rules for combat that you had developed. And I think I would love to hear them. And Matt, I presume you have experience with them because you've played Risus with Aaron before.
Oh, we'll see.
Yeah.
Some of them I kind of started using by the end of the campaign we did with Risus. Some of them are just ideas that I've thought of since. So I am very interested in the feedback from you two. So one of them, first of all, so one of the issues with is the runaway leader. You know, the first person to get hit, or whoever has more dice to roll is probably going to win. If you have equal dice, then it's just like who's going to roll higher than the first roll. One thing that could partially counteract that, I don't know. This is a thing that I thought of very recently, so I want to hear you guys' thoughts. But when you get a hit on somebody if you have to choose whether that hit is going to come from their amount of hit points left or going to come from the amount that they're rolling with. So
kind of choosing between damage or disadvantage.
Yeah. But then again, I feel like that would still have the issue because if you give them disadvantage, then they can do less damage. So it still is going to sort of be a runaway victory, but maybe just not quite as much of a chance for you to get them with it so quickly.
Yeah, the problem is of a whole, it's very snowbally, as you guys were saying. It's just, yeah.
Another thing is, and this is the one that I started using by the end of the superhero themed campaign that I'm in, is because in combat there were people doing very, very different things. It could be something like, and I'd ask them to describe what they were trying to do each round of combat, and it could be something like, one person is trying to outwit the other person in combat, but the other person can think twice as fast. When their superpower is that they can think at super speed. So yes, they're both good at fighting, but this should not be a straight roll of whoever has more dice, because clearly one person's trying to do something that's much harder than the thing that the other person's going to try to do. And I think that comes up a lot and can be very interesting, is when somebody tries to do something particularly difficult. And so I started enjoying, there'd be a combat, it'd go a couple rounds, but maybe I'd switch out of combat and do a I can't remember what the word for it is. Is it just a die roll, or
I don't know. We've just been calling it a challenge at this point. So
okay, you could switch if there was something that somebody described that I was like, oh, that's better suited for a challenge. They could do that in the middle of combat. And what I started doing with it sometimes, so a person would say what they wanted to do in the combat round. I would decide what the opponent wanted to do in the combat round at the same time. And then rather than just rolling their dice and comparing them to each other, I used the system for setting difficulties for challenges, which I was already comfortable with. And so it's like, oh, if this one person is trying to do something easy and they're rolling against a 5 and they got an 8, and this other person's trying to do something that's very difficult for their cliche and they're rolling against a 15 and they got a 15, well, the first one beat their difficulty by 3, but the other one just matched their difficulty. And I would use that to be able to compare things when what people were trying to do were very, very mismatched for their cliches. Did I explain that clearly?
So
basically, instead of having them straight roll against each other, I set a DC for both of them and had them roll against that, and I compared how well they did against their DCs.
It's like what they do in GURPS. That's a quick contest, but it's just that's exactly what it is. They just you measure up who won or who lost by more.
I've become what I hated the most. Somebody who runs a GURPS campaign.
Oh no. One of us.
In the end, you pick a side.
But yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons or GURPS. There is no middle ground.
You either die a hero or live long enough to become a GURPS player. But yeah, that one of my biggest issues in combat is it takes a game that's so dynamic where you can be anything and then kind of just cuts it off at one level and is the combat just becomes very, very flat. And that's my way to have it be a little bit more dynamic in combat. I also have one other idea for the team thing.
Mm-hmm.
My solution to the team thing is to copy the way Apocalypse World runs. And instead of having it be, okay, we're all going to combine as a team, it's just anytime that you make a move, the opponent also makes a move. So if 3 people are fighting against if 3 mice are fighting against 1 weasel, anytime somebody says, oh, I have something clever I want to do, they get to do it themselves. They don't have to roll together as a team, but then the weasel will also get to retaliate in some way.
Yeah.
Which sounds to me pretty similar to the way you did it, Trent, although I can't remember how many actions you had the weasel try to take in response to what we were all doing.
Well, so Risus kind of functions like that anyways, because anytime you're fighting someone, both of you are participating in the combat, and whoever's the victor deals damage. So, I mean, it wasn't like the Weasel only got 1 turn for every 3. He got 1 turn per attack. It was just with, three people railing on him so hard, the second he started to lose, he would lose faster. So
yeah, exactly. So that's why if one of you guys has an idea of a way that you can have the runaway victor work not as bad, maybe instead of giving people a choice, I'm kind of jumping around. Sorry, I'm jumping back to my previous idea.
You're good.
Maybe instead of giving people a choice, though, it literally just, you are chipping away at the amount of HP that they have, which is equal to their number of dice, but the number of dice they roll for it does not decrease until the combat is over. Actually, I think that would solve a lot of the problem.
Could you say it again?
Maybe.
So I was only half listening. I'm sorry.
So when you do the combat and somebody takes damage, they will not decrease the number of dice they roll until the combat's over. So it's still like chips away at their HP. If they run out of dice for any of their cliches, they'll be out of the combat, but it's not going to make it so that it's not going to decrease their chance of winning the rest of the combat.
Okay, I get you. Yeah.
But I do like the idea of somebody being able to, if they specifically were trying to do something that would decrease the other person's ability to fight well, I don't know, maybe just set a higher difficulty class for the thing they're doing. But I like the idea that you should still be able to be like, because I want, the thing I like about that game is that you can do anything. So I want there to be the idea of like, oh, I want to aim for their hand, this isn't going to make them bleed out. It's going to make it harder for them to swing their sword. I want to shoot at their at their starship's engine rather than, shooting at their cockpit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think maybe that could work.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know if it would completely solve the problem, but I think it'd help.
I don't think you can completely solve the problem.
Yeah. And unfortunately, the best thing about Risus is how simple it is. Anytime you try to solve the problem by adding rules, then you're chipping away at what makes it such a good game.
That's true. Might as well be playing GURPS.
No!
Yes.
Look, Matt, we'll get to GURPS soon enough, okay? We'll get to pirates soon enough. No, overall, I loved Risus. It's got some wonky bits with the combat system. Actually, no, that's really just it. That's kind of the end of my things. Like, I love Risus. It's got some wonky bits with the combat system, but just the unlimited freedom and the incredible amounts of flexibility that it gives both the players and the game master is just incredible. And I would recommend this game to literally anyone who wants to try out role-playing games, try something different, has been playing role-playing games since the 70s. Literally anyone and everyone should play this game at least once.
Here.
I agree. I agree with basically all of that. Maybe I'd make it your second RPG system just because, again, you need to have a semblance of an idea of what kind of difficulty you want to set for the players. Unless you're totally willing to make some mistakes, which, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. I definitely recommend it just because of the convenience and ease of setup. Like I said, I've got an emergency kit in my car that, again, it's 3 things, some D6s, some paper and pencils, and you've probably got 2 of those around very easily. You get the D6s and the rule sheet on your phone in like a JPEG format. You're good to go. You can do this anywhere, and anyone can learn it super easily.
It's called the Anything RPG, but it should be called the Anyone, Anything, Anywhere RPG.
The Everyone RPG.
The Anything, Everywhere, All at Once RPG.
All at once.
Everything, Everywhere, All at Once RPG.
No, please don't give them ideas.
A24, you should reach out to, oh my gosh, what's his name? Reach out to, okay, why can I not, who on earth made Risus?
I don't even know. Who did make Risus?
John Ross.
S. John Ross.
Risus. A24, reach out to S. John Ross. This could be fun.
But yeah, I love Risus. I think it's great. I think that anybody can be a player. Like, you don't need to have had any experience with Risus at all, or with any RPGs at all. And I think anybody can be a game master who is, even if you haven't had any experience as a game master, but you have a good idea of how, when to ramp up tension, when to say no to your players, and when to kind of make things difficult, and also you're willing to majigger around with the rules a little. That's not even a word. Just like shift up the rules, like if you're going to play it for longer than one session, you're going to want to be able to apply your own thinking to it. But if that fits you, this is a great RPG to play. It can fit whatever idea you want. So yeah, highly recommended. So go play Risus. The PDF is free too.
Anything you would like to say?
I feel like
any last words on Risus?
Any last words?
No, Risus is good. I like Risus. I think it is one of the most important staples for anyone's one-shot, one-page RPG arsenal. One-shot or one-page arsenal works for both. It works for anything. It's the anything RPG. Imagine that.
Mm-hmm. Actually, one final thing I should have said way earlier. If anybody wants to watch another actual play of Risus, there's look up Sans Pants Radio. It's these really crass, hilarious Australian comedians, and they have a bunch of shows, but they have one called I think they called it Dinosaur Park, and it's their just unhinged, absolutely absurd approach to Jurassic Park, and that was my first introduction to Risus, so highly recommended, very funny, just completely off the walls crazy.
Awesome.
So there we go. Now everybody has a required reading.
Required
reading or watching.
Okay, your homework, listen to Australians try to run Jurassic Park. That's awesome.
So good. They used an alternate version of hit points where the characters had a bunch of small children with them. And so every time they lost a hit point.
Yes. Everyone,
Okay.
thank you for
I'll just leave it at that.
for listening to Systems. This has been a fantastic game. Tune in next time. Don't know when that's going to be. Don't know what we're going to be playing, but we just need to keep Aaron from finishing that sentence. That is for the imagination. Thank you, folks. Good night.
See ya.
Goodbye. Farewell. Don't do GURPS.